I joked about his vasectomy at the pre-party. His reaction left everyone speechless. Hello, Reddits. My name is Vernice, and I'm a 28-year-old florist. This is my first time on this app. I don't know what I'm doing here, to be honest. I just somehow found myself here, perhaps in a deluded, desperate attempt to look for a solution to my situation. A situation that can never be reversed? Or maybe it's because I practically have no one to talk to. Not anymore. Not after what I have done. You see, my wedding is supposed to be tomorrow, but right now, even if a wedding's going to be held, there will be no groom, no parents, or even guests at the wedding. Yes, my fiancé called off our wedding a week before our wedding because I had done the most stupid thing, really, and now I regret it so much. But there's nothing I can do to change his mind. The deed is done. I met Evans about 3 to 4 years ago. Freshly out of school, I had no money or business plans. I only knew right from the start that I wanted to own my own flower shop. But my parents weren't exactly in support of that dream. They felt a flower shop was a belittling position, particularly for a child that came out of their loins. So I couldn't exactly ask them for the capital needed to start my business. So I worked at a shop for a while. It was also a flower shop, and I wanted to use the opportunity to gain the experience. It was there I met Evans for the first time. He had come to buy a flower for his mother, whose birthday was that day, and he had no idea which flower to get. I was only glad to give him options, and Evans had taken an instant liking to me. He had always said it was the way I chatted about the flowers like they were humans that had made him become interested in me at first. I had advised him on which flowers to get, and I thought that was that about our meeting. We weren't going to meet again unless he had another occasion to come again. He didn't exactly seem like the type to go to a flower shop every day, and even though he seemed like a really fun person to talk to, I tried to forget about him. But surprisingly, Evan started showing up at the shop once or twice a week. He made excuses for buying flowers, and each time, even though it was still for his mother, he would ask me to explain why he had to get the exact one I pointed out. It was later, when we started dating and I had met his mother, that she had told me that she was so surprised when he came bringing her flowers every week until she found out the real reason why. We became friends because of how much we would chat whenever he came around. The way he would look at me with so much concentration, like I was saying something very important even though it was only just about the flowers, made me happy. It felt good to be treated as if every word you say was important, and slowly the feelings crept in. I looked forward to seeing him each day at the shop, and whenever I did see him, my heart skipped a beat or two, and my cheeks always felt like they were on fire. I couldn't help it. Evans is really handsome and funny, and also charming. He also has this one-sided dimple that pops up whenever he smiles, making him even more handsome with his dark hair that seemed to glisten anytime he walked in through the door. And there was his dress sense to consider, too. Evans never wore tight pants like men his age did. He was always comfortable in his baggy trousers and his loose shirts. But even though the fashion was out of vogue, Evans' body still managed to make them look so sexy. It was easy to really fall for him. I can still picture the day he asked me on a date when I close my eyes. I remember what he wore that day to the shop and how he had dragged his hand over his hair, a habit I learned when we started dating that he did whenever he got nervous. I remember the way I smiled and blushed and hadn't even tried to think about the answer before agreeing to meet up with him. Our first date was a picnic. Evans had chosen the day, time, and place. I was cool with it because I didn't have to work that day. I remember having so much fun. We talked about everything and anything that day. We even got to discuss my dreams of owning my own flower shop. It was that day I found out that he's a practicing surgeon, which explained the reason he didn't show up every day at the shop, only once or twice a week and randomly 2 on different days. After the date, Evans had insisted on dropping me home, and he had kissed me for the first time on the porch of my rented apartment before leaving. Our love story had an even faster pace after that. I mean, after the kiss. To be honest, Evans is a really smart and intelligent guy, and even though he sucked at surprises, he was, and still is, the best man I could have ever met. When Evans eventually asked me out after a month of being friends, I gladly agreed to be his girlfriend. Evans had first helped me raise enough capital to open up a mini flower shop. I was so happy, and because of how much I love my job, I was always at my shop every day. Evans eventually asked me to move in with him, and I did. It had a lot of advantages. I got to see Evans on the days he was off, and I also didn't need to pay any rent. My shop was also close to Evan's place and was within walking distance. I was happy with my life. I felt satisfied even. Within a year of being together as a couple, we had known each other's families, and they supported our relationship. Evan's mom loved me very much and was always checking in on me every time. Most times when I was bored and Evans was too busy with work, I would go over to his mom's place, and she was always happy to see me. We would cook together, and then she would serve me tea while we watched numerous videos of Evan's childhood, which was always funny. Life was good back then. Well, not everything just became imperfect. I wanted a baby with Evans. I didn't discuss this with him at first. I thought it was a normal process for a couple. You know, fall in love, then date, get married, and have kids. It would be what you'd expect from a relationship, especially one that was already a year old. But I got the biggest surprise of my life when I mentioned kids one day, and Evans had reacted very badly. He just stopped talking and then left the house that day. I knew he had no work that day because he was off duty, so he had probably gone somewhere to be alone. I didn't know what to do, and I tried reaching out to him, worried that I had said something out of the ordinary or something to offend him deeply. Evans didn't come home until very late at night that day, and because I had slept off uncomfortably on the cushion in the living room, I woke up when he came in. He came to sit beside me and apologized for storming off like that. He looked really sad, and I asked for an explanation. It was then Evans told me that he had a vasectomy done when he was 24 years old. I was really shocked because I wouldn't have expected that someone as young as he was would consider such a permanent state of childlessness. He then explained to me that his father had apparently died of some disease that I cannot for the life of me remember the name. I have always sucked at school. But according to what he explained that night, it was some disease that affected a man and could be transferred to his kids. But luckily, the disease had been a recessive one, so he had not been affected by it. But because he is a carrier of the disease, he had opted for a vasectomy, so he wouldn't have to inflict any of his children with the pain of having such a disease. I couldn't even speak as he explained everything. I just stared at him in shock, and all my head could process at that point was that I wouldn't be able to have a baby that I've wanted for so long. It all made sense immediately, he told me, how he was always avoiding topics that led to marriage because that would inevitably lead to a conversation about a child. After overcoming my shock, I was angry, really angry. Although he mentioned that we could adopt kids and gave me other options, the fact that I couldn't have a child the normal way just pissed me off. And there was the fact that we had been together for a year before he decided to tell me that very important bit of information. Evans apologized several times for not telling me about it beforehand, but I refused to speak to him that night. I had even slept in the guest room, locking myself in and trying to process everything. It changed everything I had always believed in, particularly about our relationship. And I just couldn't stop thinking about the fact that my other biggest dream would be squashed if I ended up marrying Evans. Evans tried to talk to me the next day, but I continued ignoring him, and I did so for 3 whole days. It was only after speaking to my mom about it, and she had asked me if I could bear to lose Evans, and when I couldn't come up with a positive response, she had told me to make the decision that I thought was best for me. I got back home that day, and luckily, Evans was home. He looked so sad, and I apologized to him for reacting badly to what he told me. I told him I didn't mind the whole medical situation, and that whenever we were ready to get married, we could adopt a child, or do whatever else that was necessary. Evans was so happy, and he tried for several days to please me with different gifts, and it was really nice. And after that, Evans and I were happy and content with our lives. Or he was. I wasn't exactly happy. I still wasn't so pleased with the fact that he couldn't father a child, but I learned to live with it. I didn't bring it up again, especially after the last time. I didn't want to offend Evans. But then came another problem. Evans still kept hesitating on the talks of marriage, especially after I told him that I had reconsidered our options on having an adopted child. I had shared the problem of his vasectomy with a friend who had suggested sperm bank or having an IVF. But when I mentioned it to Evans, he had refused because IVF still meant having a child with his own blood and a high tendency of carrying the disease. And he also wouldn't accept us going to a sperm bank and having me pregnant with another man's baby. And that made me even more angry because I felt all he had to say on the matter were just excuses. It also made me start to overthink the situation. Maybe it was because he didn't want to marry me, or maybe everything he told me was a lie, just so he didn't have to have me all dreamy, or maybe it was because he was seeing someone else. I just kept overthinking things, and because of that, I started to suspect Evan so much, which led to several of our arguments over the months. I was always accusing him of cheating on me, and I would make a whole situation out of everything. Eventually, Evans would get tired of arguing with me around the house after defending himself so much that he would leave the house. He started to take extra shifts just so he could be away from the house most of the time. I knew that I was pushing him away with everything I was doing, but I just couldn't stop. I was so paranoid and angry. I loved him so much, and I didn't want to lose him. Staying until late at the shop became a normal thing because Evans was probably not going to be at the house anyway. This continued between us for months just until I met someone, Sam, a photographer. He had come to my shop that sunny afternoon. He had handed me a picture, and I was surprised when I saw that it was a picture of myself looking lovingly at the fresh flowers I just got delivered to my store that morning. The picture looked so nice, and I looked amazing in it. He managed to capture the sun reflecting on my face and the smile on my face while I looked at the flowers and touched the leaves tentatively. He apologized for taking my picture without asking for permission, but he had apparently seen me looking really beautiful and knew he had to take the picture. I didn't mind because the picture turned out beautiful anyway. He had asked why I wasn't a model because I apparently had the physique. I was really surprised he thought so because that was the first time anyone thought I was model material. The look of surprise must have shown on my face, and he went further to explain some of my features that accentuated my beauty and would be picture-worthy. I was blushing by the end of his speech and so happy. I hadn't felt that happy ever since Evans and I started having a bridge in our relationship. I paid full attention to him as he explained and complimented my beauty. Eventually, he had to leave because he apparently had a job around the area, but he had promised to be back. I waited until late that evening for a different reason that day. It wasn't to stay away from the house that felt empty without Evans. It was to see Sam again. But he didn't show up that evening, and I had to close up the shop that day, really disappointed. The next day, I looked forward to seeing him, and I had even decided to open up the shop earlier than usual, but Sam didn't show up again that day either, or the next day after that. He didn't show up for the rest of the week too, and I had given up on seeing him again when he finally showed up. When he did show up, I was strangely excited to see him. I was happy when he showed up, and when he talked, I hung on to every one of his words like he was saying something really important. He was like a breath of fresh air after the choking interior of my relationship with Evans, even though I caused everything. He encouraged me to try modeling, and I accepted. He was, of course, my photographer. Every day I brought dresses to the shop and changed into them so that Sam could take different pictures of me. We became really close. I was happy to go to the shop every day, even on a weekend that I usually didn't go out, because I just wanted to see Sam. He made me feel really beautiful and sexy, and he used photography as an excuse to touch me sometimes. He would run his hand through my hair in a way to ruffle it, because he said it would fit perfectly with a particular theme he had in mind. Sometimes he would touch my waist and adjust me to twist and turn or stay in a certain position that he wanted me in. I didn't object to it. I liked it. In fact, I enjoyed it, so I would purposely make some mistakes in a pose that I had already perfected in front of a mirror just to get him to touch me. We hung out so many times, and sometimes I would close the shop early so we could go have lunch or dinner. It finally happened. Sex with Sam finally happened after only a month of knowing him. The first time had been a mistake, to be honest. Sam had invited me over to his place, and I accepted the offer. I was sitting on another chair a bit farther from him, and we barely even spoke. Not because we didn't want to, but because there was nothing coming to mind to say. When Sam saw that the awkwardness was getting really big, he left where he sat and came to sit right beside me. I just smiled awkwardly, especially when he reached for my hair and ran his hand through it while complimenting my hair. He then proceeded to kiss my cheek and also my nose, but when he reached for my mouth, I pulled away at first. He apologized for not asking for my permission, and I had accepted his apology. He didn't touch me again after that, but insisted I drank something, so I settled for a bottle of beer. An hour later, I was a bit tipsy from the beer I had, and also loose-tongued. We were talking and laughing like we always have. And then Sam reached for me again. This time, I didn't resist his attempt. I wasn't thinking about Evans in that instance. All that was in my head was the powerful sexual tension between Sam and I. When he kissed me, I allowed him and even shifted so I could be pressed even closer into his chest. When he unbuttoned my shirt, hesitant at first, and I didn't resist, He continued all the way down and stripped me of it totally. Before I knew it, I was totally naked and breathing really heavily from the sex marathon Sam and I had just finished having. Then the guilt crept in. I had just cheated on my relationship of almost 4 years with a guy I just met. I felt really guilty, and all I could do at that moment was silently gather my clothes and put them on. Sam, on the other hand, didn't share my guilt because he just sat on the chair, stark naked, watching me put on my clothes. When I left his place, I went home directly. I wanted to change my clothes and have a bath, as if that would erase what I had just done. Evans had gotten home before me, though, and he had prepared a really big surprise. The whole living room was dark except for the glow of the candle lights arranged on the floor, with petals of roses leading to the dining room. I was so surprised, and when I went with the trail, I found Evans in the dining room with a romantic setting for dinner. When I tried to ask what was happening, he shushed me and asked me to sit. I sat down, and he served me my meal, my favorite meal, and he asked me to eat. But I couldn't eat. I wanted to know what was going on, and Evans had gone on with this little speech about how sorry he was that everything between us was so sour and had promised his undying love to me. It was so sweet that I cried at the end. It wasn't because of the speech that I cried, though. It was because of what I had done just a few minutes ago. Evans, although, didn't know that and had thought it was the effect of his speech. I was truly touched by it, but I was just more burdened with guilt, the guilt of what I had just done. I managed to smile through the dinner, pretending like I had just not left the arms of another man, like I hadn't moaned another man's name, forgetting that I was in a committed relationship with a loving man. The whole evening went well. Well, I managed to pretend throughout, and Evans and I really did make up. I also promised myself that evening never to meet up with Sam again, but as you can probably guess, I still did. When he came into my shop the next week after I had successfully avoided him that week by closing very early and coming in very late, he was able to figure out what I was actually doing. When he came around and demanded explanations, I lied that I was busy, but Sam didn't buy it. Eventually, I had ended up promising a visit the next day to his apartment. I know. It was stupid, but I just couldn't stop it. Sam is a manipulator, and he managed to get the words out of me. I honored my promise, and well, that has been my other mistake. Because I left that evening again sexually satisfied and emotionally burdened. 2 weeks after that day, Evans had proposed to me, and I had gladly said yes, pushing down the guilt that came with my happiness. I didn't plan to sleep with Sam again. Twice was enough, and I wouldn't let him manipulate me again, especially because I had a wedding to plan. A lifetime to commit to with Evans, the man I love. Well, so I thought. Because when Sam had come around and seen my engagement ring and had been upset about it, I tried to comfort him, and the only way I could have done that was to offer him sex. Again. I don't know why I kept allowing Sam to lure me into doing his wishes. Perhaps I was a fish brain. I behaved like someone who didn't have a mind of her own any time that Sam came around. Although after the sex, I was able to tell Sam that that was the last time between us because of my marriage. Sam had just left angrily with no comments to my words. He didn't show up again after that day. I was happy. I thought I was finally done with that chapter of my life. I thought that I wouldn't face the consequences of my actions, that I was free. But then again, karma wouldn't be real if I didn't face any consequences now, would it? Because somehow Evans had found out about my secret affair, and he did so 2 weeks before our wedding. I should have noticed how his behavior changed within those 2 weeks. How he avoided being in the same space as I was for too long. How he took on more shifts so he could stay away from the house as much as he could. How he barely ever spoke to me or asked me how the wedding preparations that were left to me alone to prepare were going. I thought he was just stressed about the whole wedding and that he took more shifts because of the leave he had taken in advance for the wedding and our honeymoon. I didn't think anything else about his behavior. Evans and I had decided a month before our wedding that we were not going to have our wedding pre-party a day before the wedding. I didn't want anyone nursing a hangover at my wedding. I wanted everything to be perfect. And we also had decided not to have separate parties because I didn't trust what they did at those kinds of parties, especially the men. The day when everything became ruined finally came. The day of our pre-party had come, and I was pretty excited from the beginning of that fateful evening. In fact, everything was going on really well. I didn't have a lot of friends, but I had invited over the young ladies that frequented my store, and over time, we had become good friends. Also my long-distance cousin, who had to travel down to make it for the party. Evans, however, had lots of male friends, and they had graced the party with their presence, although Evans himself had not shown up until 2 hours after the party had already started. It was obvious from his looks that he was just coming from the hospital and hadn't even bothered going home to change his clothes, which was definitely from the night before. He didn't even acknowledge me when he got there. He went directly to his friends and started talking to them. I felt insulted, especially because the girls had noticed the way he ignored me, so I went to stay by his side and grabbed his hand and held on to it. I ignored the way he tensed when I held him and the way he stopped talking completely. Joe, one of Evan's friends who had always had a good rapport with me, started making jokes about his boy, referring to Evans becoming a man and taking a wife. I laughed and joked along with him. Joe had joked about how sure he was that his friend was a good performer in bed, which was the reason I was marrying him. Another one of his friends had chipped in about how sure he was that Evans was a sharpshooter and was going to get me pumped and filled up with a baby soon. Joe had answered with a snort and added a joke about how we probably didn't need to go to the hospital when I got pregnant and needed to have the baby because Evans was obviously a surgeon. I snorted after his friend said those words and rolled my eyeballs, and I said so casually, "Kids will maybe come when we're so old and our teeth are about to fall off because Evans here decided to cut off his pipe making babies." It was a joke. They were meant to laugh. And I thought they all knew. They were all Evans's friends, so I thought they knew, but apparently they didn't because they all just looked at me all shocked and confused by my statement. Evans had the worst reaction of all. He hadn't reacted almost immediately, but he had first removed my hands that were clutching his tightly with so much force, I felt some pain. Then he smiled in a wicked way that made me shiver in a fearful way and said with a casual and loud tone, "That must have been your excuse for sleeping around with your photographer friend." I was so shocked that I couldn't even move at all. I didn't know what to say. Different thoughts were running through my head. How did he find out? What else does he know? By now everyone had stopped partying and were looking at us. I tried to deny what he was saying. I tried to make it out to be a joke, but Evans had laughed then, seeing my reaction. He then went ahead to narrate right in front of everyone how my lover had decided to show up at his workplace, and explained how we've been together for the last months, listing reasons why Evans shouldn't marry me. It was then I understood all the strange questions Sam had asked me about my fiancé when I told him I was getting married, like what his name was and where he worked and other personal details I felt divulging wasn't any big deal. It wouldn't have been a big deal if I was telling some random person and not my lover who had not been exactly too happy about my engagement. Evans, after his explanation, had looked me dead in the eye and told me that he was done with the relationship. I tried to go after him, but he just brushed me off like I was an annoying fly, and he left. It was only after Evans left and his friends right after, but not before giving me angry and disappointed looks. The girls left one by one after that, none of them bothering to say a word to me. They obviously thought I was a shame to womanhood. I couldn't sleep a wink that night after I got to the room I rented. Yes, I booked a room at a cheap motel because I was too scared to go home and see Evans. And perhaps I had a little hope that he would calm down and be more willing to listen to my pleas the next day. But that had not been the case. In fact, the next day when I got home, I met my stuff outside the house safely packed to a corner on the porch. I panicked and knocked for several minutes, begging Evans to forgive me, but he wouldn't even open the door. I had to leave eventually, and since I had nowhere else to go, I had gone to my parents' place, but they had immediately turned me away. News travels fast, especially bad news. I don't know how, but my parents had already found out about my not-so-decent act, and they were so angry with me and didn't want me in their house. They didn't want to hear anything that I had to say, not that I had any. Eventually, I ended up sleeping with my flowers in the store before I got a tiny room that could have been used for storage and not a space for a human to live in. But sadly, that's where I am right now as I type this long and sad story of my life. I regret everything even more now, and I wonder desperately if there's any way that I could apologize or show Evans how sorry I am for everything I did to him. Or is there? Does such an opportunity exist? Update. Hello, Reddits. This is my second and final post here, and I know that you all probably don't want to hear from me again or even find out that I'm still breathing. Your not so discreet comments about where I should dump my apologies, regrets, and sad life aren't very encouraging. I cannot say that your words did not get to me. In fact, They got a very large part of me. You guys have managed to make me feel even worse than I already feel. But then again, the blame is all mine. I should never have done all that I did. There wasn't an exact reason for cheating. It wasn't for the sex, nor was it for money. Those are the two major reasons why a woman would probably cheat. But mine had been none of that. I was just selfish and greedy, and above all, really stupid. I could have avoided all that has happened in my life if only I applied more sense to everything. But I thought I could eat my cake and have it. Nights like this, when I cannot fall asleep burdened by the weight of my sin, are nights when I pick up my phone and type up long messages to Evans, trying to just ease my guilt. But then Evans never replies to any of them. He has made it clear where he stands, and it's clearly not with me. He hates me, and he's making sure that everything also reflects it. My parents are still so angry with me and won't speak to me. I have no one to talk to or rant to. I have no friends because no one has spoken to me since the incident. I've never understood the word lonely until now. I feel so lonely and depressed, and I regret everything so much. I could have done better. There was no reason to cheat on Evans. He never gave me any reason to, but yet I stupidly did. Every day I stare at the walls, and then my brain acts like some broken recorder and replays every moment when everything went wrong at the party. I should have been sensitive enough to realize when I should shut up. I should have been sensitive enough to realize exactly when Evans had found out about my affair. No, before that, I should have been wise enough to know that I could never cheat and get away with it. I wonder how life would have been had I not ruined mine with my own hands. I probably would be married to Evans by now. Maybe we would already be trying for a child now through medical means or not, but I would probably be happy regardless. I would go to bed with Evans's arms wrapped around me through the night and wake up to the tiny kisses he would always plant on my face. I would not be stuck in this tiny room of mine, waking up to the coldness it eludes. My parents wouldn't hate me, and Evans's mother would probably still be demanding that I come spend the weekend with her to keep her company. I feel so miserable, and I know I probably wouldn't even be here, trying to get people who don't care about me to understand me and my feelings. It is so sad how I've ended up. I remember just how much Evans used to adore me and cherish every word I say. He'd smile at me and always make me feel like he was the luckiest man on earth, but honestly, it was the other way round. And the painful thing is that I didn't even realize it until it is now too late. He was the worst decision I could have ever made, and I regret ever thinking that Sam could ever match up with Evans. I wish I could go back in time and change everything I have done. If I ever get a chance to, that is, I probably won't. I feel so broken and angry at myself for thinking I could get away with everything I have done. Evans was the best man I could ever pray for, and yet I was stupid enough to have lost him. I wish so desperately that there's something I can do, however ridiculous that sounds, to get Evans to forgive me. I wish he wouldn't hate me so much and not want to have anything to do with me anymore. But then again, all I can do now is wish. Evans doesn't want me anymore. I'm a disgusting cheat and a liar. I'm the worst person on earth, and nothing hurts as much as having to lose the one person that matters the most to me. I've lost it all. The life I have and the life I should have. Because I was crazy enough to believe that I would never get caught in my game. Second chances are hard to come by, and I probably will never get one. Not with how terrible Evans feels about me now. Not with how everything has ended up. I will probably remain stuck like this, living in regrets and pain. I hope you guys will learn from me, even though I have nothing but bitter lessons to teach. But then again, it's always better to learn from the mistakes of others, is it not? Goodbye, guys.